Something about these photos exploded across the internet within hours, and it wasn't because people were celebrating a little girl's birthday. It was because millions of people looked at the images, looked again, and then started asking the same uncomfortable question: why does every new photo seem to create more mysteries than answers? What was supposed to be a simple birthday tribute suddenly became the center of a storm involving changing appearances, old controversies, legal documents, and years of unanswered speculation. And the deeper people looked, the stranger everything seemed to become.
Meghan is a hypocrite in the biggest sense of the word, because these children have moments where they look completely different in their sizes and the color of their hair. I think what Meghan is doing is trying to control a narrative, but failing miserably at it. We have caught on to her. We figured her out.
What you can tell is, in my opinion, I can't see any traces of Meghan Markle in her features whatsoever. I can see a lot of Prince Harry, but I don't see a lot of Markle. Now, that could just be the camera angle, all of that. And isn't it interesting about when she sat down with Oprah Winfrey and talked about the concerns about the colour of the skin of her children?
Sorry, but the ever-changing hair colour and ever-changing size of their children is what causes so many conspiracy theories. How can she be smaller now at age 5 than she was a year ago climbing Mama Mountain? They are playing games, and I think even using AI to manipulate images.
By removing the names Rachel and Meghan, it suggests that Rachel Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, née Markle, did not give birth to Archie. That a woman who was identified as Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex gave birth to that child.
The reaction was immediate. While headlines focused on birthday wishes and family happiness, countless viewers were examining details. Tiny details. The kind of details most people would normally overlook. But when a public figure has spent years controlling every image released to the world, those details suddenly start to matter. Every photograph becomes evidence. Every appearance becomes a clue. Every inconsistency becomes a question. Then people started comparing the newly released birthday photographs to previous images that had appeared only weeks earlier. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. A family portrait, a smiling child, a carefully crafted moment. But social media users weren't looking at the photos emotionally. They were studying them like investigators, and what they noticed sparked a flood of discussion.
Something is always off with the photos, and it's obvious they are heavily photoshopped and often badly, hence the little girl's hand melting into the balloon strings. Harry is creating more speculation over his children than what was ever said about Hewitt and his DNA, and this will backfire on his children as they grow older.
The dress immediately caught attention, not because there was anything wrong with it, but because people had seen it before. The same dress, the same styling, the same bracelet, the same overall appearance. Suddenly, what was presented as a special birthday moment began looking suspiciously familiar to online observers. Was this really a newly captured celebration? Or was something else happening behind the scenes? Questions multiplied when attention shifted toward the bracelet itself. The internet has become incredibly good at identifying luxury items, and it didn't take long before comparisons began appearing everywhere.
But there was nothing adorable about this. What it is a hypocritical money play. At 5 years old, Meghan Markle has realized that that poor young girl is the best way for her to make money.
The discussion wasn't really about jewelry. It was about symbolism. Critics began asking whether a carefully staged birthday image was also functioning as something else entirely. Was it family content, brand promotion, public relations, or all three at once? The more people debated it, the more attention the photos received. But the jewelry wasn't even the biggest issue. The biggest issue was something far harder to explain. People began placing photographs side by side. Images released months apart. Images released years apart. And suddenly comparisons flooded every platform. Some viewers claimed the child appeared dramatically different from one photo to another. Different size, different proportions, different hair color, different facial features, different overall appearance. Now, genetics are complicated. Photography changes perception. Lighting changes appearance. Cameras distort reality. All of that is true. Yet critics argue that one explanation couldn't account for every inconsistency being discussed online.
Now, the idea of this solo picture really is to make sure that people can see, particularly people who could be lucrative, moving forward. By the time I would suggest this child gets to 6 or 7, maybe even earlier, we could have full-on front pictures. This is the future. This is where Meghan Markle sees the, shall we say, business brand.
That was when a simple birthday post stopped being a birthday post. It became something much bigger, because once people start believing, they're seeing a pattern. Every new image gets examined through that lens. Suddenly, every photograph isn't viewed as proof of authenticity. It's viewed as another piece of a puzzle. And then the conversation moved into even more controversial territory. The discussion exploded across comment sections, reaction channels, and social media platforms. Millions of opinions, millions of observations, millions of theories. Most unverified, many controversial, yet impossible to ignore because of their sheer volume. What made the situation even more explosive was the connection people immediately drew to previous interviews and previous claims. Years ago, accusations and allegations regarding royal family concerns became one of the biggest international stories on earth. Those interviews generated headlines for months. The entire world was discussing questions surrounding identity, appearance, race, and family dynamics. Now critics were pointing out what they viewed as a contradiction. They argued that comparisons, which were once considered sensitive, had suddenly become unavoidable because the photographs themselves invited those comparisons. Whether fair or unfair, justified or unjustified, the conversation was happening. The birth certificate controversy became the spark that reignited everything. For years, critics had argued that one question remained unanswered, and now that question was suddenly back in the spotlight. People weren't talking about rumors anymore. They were talking about records, amendments, and explanations that seemed to lead in different directions depending on who was telling the story. One side claimed there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Another side insisted the explanation never made sense. And sitting in the middle of all of it was a document that continued to fuel endless debate. What made the issue even more explosive was the fact that commentators kept pointing to historical comparisons, other royal birth records, other royal mothers, other royal traditions. Every comparison seemed to raise another question. Every question seemed to produce another theory. The situation became a maze where nobody could agree on what was fact, what was interpretation, and what was speculation. Yet despite years passing, the controversy never truly disappeared. It simply waited for another moment to return. Then attention shifted toward another mystery that critics have never stopped discussing: the hospital steps. For decades, royal births followed a familiar pattern. The world waited, cameras gathered, the family appeared, the images became history. Those moments were not just photographs. They became symbols, cultural events, shared memories watched across the globe. And that is why some commentators remain fascinated by the decision to do things differently. To critics, the decision seemed completely at odds with the public image that had been carefully constructed for years. They argued that someone who understood media attention better than almost anyone would never willingly walk away from one of the biggest global photo opportunities imaginable. That contradiction became another piece of the puzzle people couldn't stop examining. Then came the photographs, videos, and interviews that internet investigators endlessly revisit. Clips were replayed. Screenshots were shared. Old statements resurfaced. Every gesture became evidence. Every timeline became a topic of discussion. Every detail was treated as if it might reveal something larger hidden underneath the surface. But perhaps the biggest shift happened when critics began focusing on what they viewed as a contradiction between privacy and publicity. Days before the latest birthday photographs appeared, discussions surrounding social media, children, and online exposure were already gaining attention. Then the images arrived, and suddenly critics felt they had proof of something they had been arguing for years. The argument was simple. If privacy is the goal, why continue releasing carefully selected images? If social media is dangerous, why repeatedly use it? If public scrutiny is harmful, why create content that inevitably generates more scrutiny? Whether fair or unfair, those questions spread rapidly. And instead of quieting the conversation, every new explanation seemed to create additional debate. Critics pointed to family photographs, holiday posts, brand promotions, lifestyle content, and public appearances. They argued that the children had increasingly become part of a larger public narrative. Supporters disagreed. They insisted parents have every right to share selected moments while still protecting privacy. The divide grew larger. Then another detail caught attention: a family portrait featuring 3 people, not 4. For many observers, the absence immediately became a story of its own. Why was one child prominently featured while another seemed largely absent? Was it coincidence, timing, personal preference, or something deeper? The discussion exploded because it touched on another emotional subject entirely: family dynamics. Commentators began drawing comparisons to old royal stories, old rivalries, and old wounds. They revisited narratives about heirs and spares, visibility and invisibility, attention and neglect. Suddenly, a simple photograph was being analyzed as if it contained an entire family drama hidden inside a single frame. Meanwhile, attention turned across the Atlantic where another royal image was unfolding. While one side seemed trapped in constant controversy, the other appeared increasingly focused on public service. Every appearance generated comparisons. Every public interaction became part of a larger contrast. One story seemed dominated by explanations, clarifications, and damage control. The other appeared centered on connection, stability, and duty. That contrast became impossible to ignore. And that is why these questions refuse to disappear. Because this story is no longer just about photographs. And yet, the most fascinating part of this entire saga isn't any single photograph, statement, or controversy. It's the pattern. The feeling that every time the story begins fading away, something happens that pulls it right back into the spotlight. A new image appears. A new interview resurfaces. A new contradiction gets noticed. And suddenly the conversation starts all over again, louder than before. That is exactly what happened with Lilibet's birthday photos. What should have been a straightforward family celebration transformed into another chapter of an ongoing mystery that critics claim never seems to reach a satisfying conclusion. The problem for Harry and Meghan is that public trust works like a bank account. Every contradiction becomes a withdrawal. Every unanswered question becomes another withdrawal. Every explanation that fails to convince everyone creates another withdrawal. Over time, people stop looking at individual incidents and start looking at the overall pattern. That is precisely where the Sussexes find themselves today. Fairly or unfairly, millions of people are no longer evaluating one photo at a time. They're evaluating years of headlines, years of interviews, years of documentaries, years of statements, and years of controversies all at once. What makes this even more damaging is that the internet has become a permanent archive. Nothing disappears anymore. Every old clip can be rediscovered within seconds. Every interview can be replayed. Every quote can be compared against newer statements. Every photograph can be placed side by side with another. 20 years ago, public figures could move on from controversies much more easily. Today, every detail lives forever, waiting to be revisited the moment a new development appears. That is why critics continue returning to the same subjects: the birth certificate amendment, the hospital step decision, the privacy versus publicity debate, the children's appearances, the family photographs, the social media strategy. None of these issues exist in isolation anymore. They have merged together into one giant narrative that people constantly analyze from different angles. Supporters see unfair attacks. Critics see unanswered questions. Neutral observers see a story that refuses to disappear. Meanwhile, another reality continues unfolding behind the scenes. Harry's relationship with the royal family appears more fractured than ever. Reports of silence between brothers. Reports of missed opportunities for reconciliation. Reports of growing distance that now stretches across years rather than months. Whether every report is accurate or not almost becomes irrelevant because the public perception has already formed. The image of a prince who walked away from everything now competes with the image of a future king who appears increasingly confident in his role, and every new comparison seems to strengthen that divide. The irony is impossible to ignore. Harry spent years discussing the pain of feeling overlooked within the royal family, the pain of feeling secondary, the pain of being the spare. Yet critics now point to family photographs and social media posts, claiming they see echoes of those same dynamics appearing again. Whether those claims are true or not, the symbolism alone has become powerful enough to fuel endless discussion. And while all of that unfolds, Meghan faces a separate challenge entirely. Every attempt to shape her public image now seems to generate competing interpretations. A family photo becomes a branding discussion. A birthday post becomes a media controversy. A statement about privacy becomes a debate about exposure. The gap between intention and perception perception appears to grow wider with every passing year. That is why this story remains so compelling. Not because people necessarily know the answers, but because they believe the answers exist somewhere beneath the surface. They keep searching for the missing piece that will suddenly make everything fit together. The photograph that explains the previous photograph. The statement that explains the previous statement. The detail that finally resolves years of speculation. The birthday photos were supposed to celebrate a 5-year-old child. Instead, they reignited years of controversy, years of speculation, and years of unresolved debate. Whether those questions are justified or not, one fact is impossible to deny: they are not going away. Every new release creates fresh scrutiny. Every attempt at clarification generates more analysis. And until the lingering mysteries that critics keep pointing toward are addressed in a way that satisfies the public, the conversation will continue growing.